Hello everyone. Today our class is on Introduction to Central Nervous System, and I feel very happy to tell you all that this is my first ever YouTube video, and I'm also feeling happy to tell you that introduction part has been given as a first e-learning class, lecture class. So this class we are going to see about the introduction to Central Nervous System and the nerve physiology. So the divisions and functions of the Central Nervous System. Functional anatomy and histology of spinal cord, the spinal nerve, that is the anterior and posterior roots of spinal nerves, ascending tracts and also the descending tracts, and structure and classification of nerve and the nerve injuries. So being the central nervous system, the nervous system, so it's going to be the leader of the human body. So we all know all the activities in our human body is mainly controlled by the central nervous system. So now we'll see how the central nervous system is broadly classified. It is broadly classified into central nervous system and peripheral nervous system. So again, under central nervous system we have the brain and spinal cord. Under peripheral nervous system we have somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. Now the brain is again classified into forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. And the somatic nervous system, basically it supplies the spinal nerves that are supplying the skeletal muscles. And autonomic nervous system, the classification is they have two divisions, that is one is sympathetic, another one is parasympathetic nervous system. We'll just move on to one by one. We'll just finish off the brain. How it is classified, what are the different parts that are seen in the brain, and then we'll see like what is spinal cord, and then we'll see what is somatic nervous system and also the autonomic nervous system. The brain, so brain weighs about like 1.5 kgs. All the structures located within a hard bony skull. It is divided into three parts: forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. So forebrain, again it is classified into telencephalon and diencephalon. Midbrain is otherwise called as mesencephalon and hindbrain is otherwise called as rhombencephalon. Now the forebrain. So forebrain contains telencephalon. The parts of telencephalon is cerebral hemispheres, and then the hemisphere has four lobes, that is frontal, parietal, occipital and temporal lobes, and also the subcortical nuclei called basal ganglia. Forebrain also contains the diencephalon. Diencephalon parts are the upper 2/3 of thalamus and the lower 1/3 of hypothalamus. And we'll see. So mesencephalon, otherwise called midbrain. So midbrain, it is divided into two parts by aqueduct of Sylvius. So the ventral part of cerebral peduncle and dorsal part of tectum, both are present in the midbrain. So hindbrain. In the hindbrain, we can see the parts that are midbrain, pons and medulla they are called as brainstem. And brainstem being very important, it contains the nuclei of all the cranial nerves except first and second cranial nerves. So now we'll see what is peripheral nervous system. So peripheral nervous system it has two functional divisions. That is, one is sensory, that is afferent. Afferent means like anything, any sensation, anything carried from the periphery to the center, that is the central nervous system or the brain or the spinal cord. That's why it is called sensory division, otherwise called afferent. So the somatic afferent nerves carry impulses from skin, skeletal muscles, joints to the central nervous system. And visceral afferent nerves, they transmit impulses from the visceral organs to the CNS. They have two divisions. Now we'll see what is motor division. So we all know motor is otherwise called efferent, and they transmit the impulse from the central nervous system to the effector organs. For example, muscles and glands. So now the motor division. Again, motor division has two subdivisions. One is somatic nervous system, other one is autonomic nervous system. So somatic nervous system, basically it is coming under our voluntary control. Somatic motor nerve fibers that conduct impulses from CNS to skeletal muscles. And autonomic nervous system, basically it is an involuntary nervous system, that's why it is called autonomic. And again it has two divisions, sympathetic and parasympathetic. There are so many activities in our body, that is like heart rate and intestinal motility. These are basically controlled by autonomic nervous system. That's why it is called autonomous or autonomic nervous system. So the two divisions are sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Now let's see what is spinal cord. So we can see the spinal cord, this picture. So it runs through the vertebral canal. It extends from the foramen magnum to the second lumbar vertebra. Foramen magnum to the second lumbar vertebra, and we can see the regions. So the regions are again classified into 5 types, that is cervical, set of spinal nerves which are coming from the cervical vertebra, that is cervical. There are 8 pairs of spinal nerves coming from cervical division, and then thoracic there are 12 pairs, lumbar 5 pairs, sacral 5 pairs, and coccygeal there's 1 pair. So gives rise to 31 pairs of spinal nerves. And here a very important thing, like all are mixed nerves. We can see a pair of nerves coming from each vertebra, and they are not uniform in diameter. And cervical enlargement, it indicates the supply of the nerves to the upper limbs, and then the lumbar enlargement, it supplies the lower limbs. Here we can see the cross section of the spinal cord. So in this cross section, you can even have a diagram. You can just practice the diagram that is given here. It's a very simple line diagram which has to be learned to understand all the concepts of the central nervous system. So we can see something like inside the gray matter, that is inner portion is the gray matter and outside is the white matter. So again you can see the dorsal horn and then the ventral horn. So here is the central canal, and again something is coming from white matter. This is white matter. So white matter, we have like dorsal roots which is coming from the dorsal side, and ventral root which is coming from the ventral side. So this line diagram can be practiced easily. Now let's see the cross section of the spinal cord. So here in the cross section, we can just look at the diagram here. In the inner portion, as I said in the previous slide, the inner portion is the gray matter and the outer portion is the white matter. So inner portion, gray matter, the neurons, cell bodies, dendrites and axons are present in the gray matter, which is basically giving a gray in color. It looks gray in color. And the white matter contains the myelinated axons, basically the tracks. All the ascending and descending tracks are running in the white matter since they give the white color. That's why it is called like white matter, the portion. And then the anterior median fissure and posterior median sulcus. You can just look at the structures which are dividing the spinal cord into 2 different halves, 2 equal halves, the right and left. So this picture you can even see the white matter which is giving dorsal column, ventral column and the lateral column. So the part of the white matter is divided into dorsal, ventral and lateral. And then this is the gray matter. You can see the gray matter. Again the gray matter contains posterior horn, lateral horn and the anterior horn. Just for basic understanding of all the tracks and areas of the gray matter and white matter, it is divided into columns for white matter and horns for gray matter. So gray matter organization, here in this picture we can see the dorsal root. So inner portion, that is the gray matter. So we have the dorsal side, a horny structure called dorsal horn. It basically carries the sensory fibers. And on the other hand, we have ventral root. Ventral root basically carries the motor fibers. So this is the general rule of the spinal cord. So here from the dorsal root, we receive only the sensory fibers, and from the ventral root, we receive only the motor fibers. And again, once it comes out, we have an enlargement called dorsal root ganglion. A slight enlargement can be seen immediately when the dorsal root leaves the spinal cord. A slight enlargement called dorsal root ganglion, and then both the fibers are going to join. That is, the dorsal fibers and the ventral fibers are going to join. They form the spinal nerve. Now moving on to white matter. What is seen in the white matter? As we discussed, some are few nerve bundles are running from periphery to from the spinal cord to the brain, and few fibers are running from brain to the spinal cord. These are basically called as ascending tracts and the descending tracts. Tracts means nothing but the bundle of nerve fibers. So ascending tracts, basically they are the sensory nerve fibers. They carry the sensation from the periphery to the central nervous system. For example, dorsal column medial lemniscus pathway, or for example spinothalamic pathways. So these are the examples of ascending tracts. They carry the sensation. Now we have other side, the other tract called descending tract. So what is the function of descending tract? Again, obviously they are going to come from the central nervous system to the spinal cord. Descending tracts are otherwise called corticospinal tracts. The tracts coming from cortex to the spinal cord, otherwise called corticospinal tracts. So here the blue colored ones are they've just indicated in blue color. Those are the ascending tracts, the dorsal column pathway, and then the spinocerebellar, spinothalamic tracts. These are the ascending tracts, and descending tracts are the motor tracts. They are the lateral reticulospinal tract and lateral corticospinal tract, rubrospinal tract. They are red in color. So just for understanding, they've just few tracks are just given. Given as ascending tracks, and few tracks are given on the other side. So it is basically all the tracks runs on both the sides, that is both right side and the left side, but descending tracks are they are the motor fibers, and ascending tracks are the sensory fibers. Now let's see what are the functions of the nervous system. The functions of the nervous system: the sensory input, monitoring stimuli occurring inside and outside the body. So they are carried by, all the sensations are carried by ascending tracts, that is through the dorsal column pathway or the spinothalamic pathway. Now it integrates interpretation of sensory input. Whatever sensation or any information which is carried to the central nervous system will be processed by the brain. For example, pain or temperature or any kind of sensation which is traveling from the periphery to the brain will be processed in the brain, and brain is going to give the efferent, that is the effect, that is the motor output. So response to the stimuli by activating effector organs, that is purely through the corticospinal tract or through any of the descending tracts. Now let's see the histology of nervous tissue. Two principal cell types in the nervous system, that is neurons. So neurons are the basic structural and functional unit of the nervous system. So the excitable nerve cells that transmit electrical signals. And also we can see the supporting cells, the cells adjacent to neurons or that surround and wrap around the. See the structure and functions of neurons, and also we'll see what are the supporting structures of the neuron. And there are around 100 million neurons in the central nervous system, and the size is around 5 to 20 micrometer. And the basic function is going to be conduction of the impulses from the periphery to the center or from the center to the periphery. During one's lifetime, the number of neurons does not vary and remains constant. Size increases as the organism grows. This picture shows the structure of the neuron. The structure of the neuron, the neuron contains a cell body. The cell body contains nucleus. The cell body contains projections called dendrites. Dendrites contains the receptive regions. And here we can even inside the nucleus we have the nucleolus, and we can even see some particular structures present in the cell body, important the particle of the neurons called micelle bodies. And then we can see the structure called axon hillock, which actually connects the cell body and the axon, called axon hillock. And again from the axon hillock, the axon actually arises, and axon is going to generate and impulse generation. Basically any impulse is actually generated from the axon hillock. And then we can see the structure of the axon, which is actually covered by myelin sheath. So this is the direction of impulse which is conducted usually from the cell body to the axon terminal. And in between the myelin sheath we have particular nodes called nodes of Ranvier. And again you can see the axon is going to end at the axon terminal. It divides into so many branches and it ends with the axon terminals. And these are also the secretory components. You can see the secretory components. Now let's see the functions. So here we call neurons as the basic structural and functional unit. They receive, integrate and transmit information. So basically the impulses are actually coming to the dendrites. From the dendrites are otherwise called receptive zone, and they receive the impulses. And again here the action potential of the particular neuron is actually initiated from the axon hillock, and from there it is going to get transmitted through the axon and it reaches the axon hillock. So here we can see the part and as well as the function. So function, Schwann cells, they provide the protective myelin sheath around the axon of the medullated nerve fibers. And then myelin sheath, protection of the nerve fibers, and node of Ranvier. It allows nutrients and waste products to enter or to leave the neuron. And node of Ranvier also allows nerve impulses to move along the neuron, a process of depolarization and repolarization of the nerve membrane. We'll see the importance in detail in the properties of nerve fibers. So let's see what is myelination. The myelinated nerve fibers. So myelination is basically provided by myelin sheath. You can see the Schwann cells inside the myelin sheath. So here this is the myelin sheath and we can see the cytoplasm of the myelin sheath. So the Schwann cells, and then this is the Schwann cell nucleus. Here is the node of Ranvier. So here nodes of Ranvier bears densely packed ion channels. Let's discuss the importance of the nodes of Ranvier in detail. So here the process of myelination. So myelination, this is the Schwann cell and here you can see the axon. So the part where actually it initiates the myelin sheath is called mesoaxon. Now the process of myelination usually happens this way. The animation is very nice. It actually shows how the myelin sheath is covering the axon. So this way it happens. Now the structure of myelin sheath. The membrane of the Schwann cell envelopes the axon. The layer of Schwann cell contains sphingomyelin, which is an excellent electrical insulator. It decreases the ion flow through the membrane about 5000 folds. That is the importance of. Now let's see the types of neurons. Again, it is self-explainable. Here, depending upon the number of poles, it is unipolar, bipolar, multipolar, and one more type called pseudo-unipolar. So unipolar neurons. So again, the axon is like there's only one axon, and we have the axon terminal, and then the multipolar, and we have the pseudo-unipolar, and this is the bipolar. So bipolar, the retinal cells are basically bipolar neurons. So two poles. We can see two poles from the cell body. That's why it is called bipolar. Again, another classification would be motor neuron, sensory neuron based on the functions. And then depending upon the length of the axon, we can classify into Golgi type 1 and Golgi type 2. So zones of the neurons, we have discussed it already, but still I just want to give you a recap. So here we have the cell body. So inside this nucleus, dendrites. So this portion from dendrite till the axon hillock, we call it as signal reception. So incoming signals are received and converted to change in the membrane potential. So here what is the importance of axon hillock? Signal integration. A change in the membrane potential happens in the axon hillock. A very, very important point. And then the action potential is again traveling through the axon. That's why it is called a signal conduction. The entire axon is going to just conduct only the impulse. So this portion is called signal conduction. Action potentials are conducted to the axon terminal. So at the end portion, the signal transmission happens. So here this is the axon terminal, and neurotransmitters are released from the axon terminal into the post synaptic portion. So these are the different zones of the neuron. Now we'll just see little again. We can just brush up the properties of nerve fibers, which are actually it's going to resemble the properties of the skeletal muscle, because both nerve fiber and the skeletal muscle, the muscle and nerve, we call it as excitable tissues, and therefore most of the properties of nerve fibers are going to resemble the skeletal muscle. So I'm just going to give you a recap. So the most important property called excitability. Excitability is nothing but the ability to excite, that is a response to a stimuli. When a stimuli is given to a tissue, immediately the tissue is going to show a response. Stimulus may be chemical, mechanical, thermal or electrical. And what is the response? The response is nothing but the production of action potential. Nerve impulse, it is a propagated action potential. The impulse is actually going to get generated in the axon hillock, and it is going to get propagated, nothing but the spreading of the action potential. So the excitable tissue, all the nerve and the muscle, they are going to produce action potential. That's why it is called excitable tissues. And to excite a tissue, we need adequate strength, and also we need adequate duration. With subthreshold stimuli or with less duration, a stimuli cannot excite any tissue. So always to excite any tissue, we need the threshold, or otherwise called adequate strength or adequate duration is required. It is very important. So how it is measured? Whether a tissue has received adequate stimuli and duration. So it can be explained with the help of a graph called strength duration curve. That is, we can see the graph called strength duration curve. So we have two measurements called Reobase and chronaxy. So chronaxy, here the nerve A actually explains the nerve and B is the muscle. So A is going to give you the exact curve that is meant for a nerve, which clearly tells that it is the most important. It is a highly excitable tissue than the muscle. So we have Reobase, that is the time. Then we have the chronaxy, indicates the strength. And the next property would be all or none response. So we all know when a subthreshold stimuli is given, you can't see any response in the tissue. But when a threshold stimulus is given, ultimately the tissue is going to provide it's going to produce a response. And whatever it may be, if it is going to be a suprathreshold stimulus, and even then also it is going to produce a threshold. Either it doesn't produce any response or it produces a response. That's why it is called all or none response. Conductivity, the ability of propagating the electrical impulses or propagated action potential or nerve impulses are generated along the entire length of nerve fibers. So it is self-propagating process and impulse moves at a constant amplitude. Now let's see like how it is how the impulses are conducted in the nerve fiber. So in a synapse, basically it is like conductivity of a nerve can be explained using a law called Bell-Magady's law. Bell-Magady's law, what this law explains: in a motor nerve, impulse travels towards the effector organ. It is a standard one, it is always fixed, it is constant. In a sensory nerve, impulse travels towards the central nervous system. Basically, the Bell-Magady's law explains sensory nerve carries the impulses from the periphery to the central nervous system, and motor nerve carries the impulses from the central nervous system to the periphery. That's what the Bell-Magady's law. So conduction in unmyelinated and myelinated nerves. I told you in an earlier slide the importance of the node of Ranvier. If we see the unmyelinated nerves, unmyelinated doesn't have myelination, and the impulses once initiated will spread very slowly. The conduction velocity is going to be very slow. But look at the myelinated axon. We have the myelin sheath throughout the axon, and once the action potential is initiated, and it's going to jump from one node to the another node, from this node to the next node, from this node to the next node. Just compare the conduction velocity between the unmyelinated axon and the myelinated axon. A important property called saltatory conduction in myelinated fiber. What is saltatory conduction? Electrical current jumps from one node to another node. Action potential in myelinated fibers occurs only at the node. A very important thing. That's the advantage of node of Ranvier. So advantages are velocity of transmission increases 5 to 50 folds, and here the myelinated fiber conduction velocity would be 100 meters per second, but the unmyelinated nerve would be 0.25 meters per second. Now always the impulses will be conducted in the orthodromic conduction, that is impulses normally pass in one direction only, that is from the synaptic junction or receptor along axon to their termination. Antidromicus, obviously it is in the physiologically it doesn't happen. Refractory period, the next property would be refractory period. Refractory period, we all know, it is nothing but it is a period at which the nerve does not give any response to a second stimuli. And again, the first portion is absolutely refractory period, where the second stimulus is 100% not going to produce any response. And from this period, the period called relative refractory period, during which the second stimuli can give a little response. Accommodation or adaptation. When the stimulus strength is increased slowly to the firing level during constant application, no action potential is produced. This phenomena of adaptation to the stimuli is called accommodation. In infatiguity, nerve fiber cannot be fatigued. It's the most important one. Then summation. Nerve has a property to add the responses, property called summation. When a more than one consecutive subthreshold stimuli less than 0.5 milliseconds apart may give rise to a response due to summation. So this will be explained in detail in the synapse class. So synapse, during the properties of synapse, a very important property called temporal and spatial summation will be explained with the help of the picture. So here you just understand that summation is one property of nerve. So how do we classify? This classification we can just read. It is you can easily read it. It is self-explainable. Letter classification of Erlanger and Geiser. The another classification is numerical classification based on the numbers, and then letter classification and their origin. And we can see the neuroglial cells, the types of neuroglia, that is the central nervous system cells and the peripheral nervous system, the supporting cells. Schwann cells and satellite cells are seen in the peripheral nervous system, whereas in central nervous system, ependymal cells, oligodendrocytes, astrocytes and microglia, these are the supporting cells. They are otherwise called neuroglial cells. These are seen in the central nervous system. Now we can just move on to the nerve. So we know that the nerves once they are affected due to any injury or due to any trauma or anything, the nerve can get affected. But nerve is going to grow, but only up to some extent. So we are going to see what is the physiology behind the nerve injuries and what are the different causes and how the degeneration of the nerve is happening and how it is getting regenerated. So almost like we are done. We are just moving to the third part of this class. So we'll see what what is a spinal nerve. This is the picture of the spinal nerve. What are the different coverings of the spinal nerve? Spinal nerve is covered by a layer called epineurium, and then the nerve contains it is the bundle of nerve fibers, so many nerve fascicles. Each nerve fascicle is covered by perineurium, and perineurium contains so many nerve fibers, and each nerve fiber is covered by a layer called endoneurium. So endoneurium, here we can see inside this endoneurium we can see so many each nerve fibers. So this is one nerve fiber. You can see the structure of one nerve fiber, and we can see the Schwann cell and then the myelinated axon. We can see one fascicle here. Now we are going to discuss in detail when a nerve is injured and what is going to happen for the nerve and how this degeneration of the nerve is happening and to what extent the regeneration can happen. This is all about the nerve injuries. So nerve injury, what are the causes of the nerve injury? It is like transection, crushing, or due to any local injection of toxic substances or due to obstruction of the blood flow. These are some of the causes. So now let's see how the classification of nerve injuries are happening. The classification of nerve injuries. So we can classify into two types. One is Sedan classification and another one is Sunderland classification. So here one is like Sedan classification, neuropraxia, axon chemesis or neurochemesis. So here again it starts from 1st degree to 5th degree. We can actually compare the two different classifications. So in the Sedan classification they say neuropraxia. So here if you are able to understand this one picture, which means like it says that your entire nerve injury is very clear to you. So which means here this line diagram, it explains the axon. So this is the axon. Just observe this picture carefully. This is the axon, the inner portion, and then we can see three layers, that is inside this endoneurium, and then a middle portion called perineurium, and then the outer portion called epineurium, and there's a conduction block. Something is happening to the nerve fiber. That is conduction block. So here again number 2, that is grade 2. Grade 1 is there's a little conduction block. Now grade 2, that is axon temesis. Something is happening to the axon, that is axon discontinuity. So that is coming under second degree, otherwise called axon temesis. So second degree, third degree and fourth degree, actually they are otherwise called as axon temesis, or it can resemble the severity which is similar to the axon temesis. And then grade 5, it is equivalent to the neurotemesis of Sedan classification. So moving on to the picture, grade 1, this is a conduction block, and grade 2, the axon, there is an axon discontinuity, and then grade 3, there is an axonal plus endoneurial disruption. Endoneurium, look at the endoneurium. So endoneurium is also going to get disrupted, and look at the perineurial rupture, and also the fascicle rupture. And the fifth degree, there is a complete discontinuity between the proximal portion and the distal portion. The nerve there's a complete cut of the nerve trunk called discontinuity. So this is actually called as Wallerian degeneration. A process of degeneration of the nerve is called Wallerian degeneration. We are going to see each and every portion, every grade, each and for first degree to the fifth degree in detail. Now let's see neuropraxia. As I told, neuropraxia, basically there will be very little disrupt or rupture or disturbance to the axon. Here the endoneurium is not going to get disturbed. There's a disturbance to the axon. So the temporary functional loss. Recovery is rapid and complete because there is no much disruption to the axon or any part of the nerve. No degenerative changes, and it is caused by little pressure on the nerve. What is axon temesis? Axons are damaged. Here this picture says axons are damaged. Surrounding connective tissue are intact. Axon emesis. Distal segments undergoes Wallerian degeneration. This is the distal segment. They undergo Wallerian degeneration because there is no communication between the cell body. The connection between the cell body and the axon is completely cut, and therefore the distal portion is going to undergo changes called degeneration. Functional recovery is slow and complete. Crush injury, traction and compression. These are some of the examples. Now let's see like neurotemesis. Complete section of the nerve trunk. There's a complete section. There is no connection between the two portions. Loss of motor or sensory function. Whichever nerve it may be, it's going to be sensory nerve. There is no communication between the distal portion or the proximal portion. And again, if it is going to be motor nerve, the same situation is going to happen there also. The possibility of recovery is remote due to loss of continuity of the nerve trunk. Here, one picture explains all three. That is neuropraxia. We can see the little compression for the axon. There is no much disaster to the neuron. Here, axon temesis, injury is severe. So distal portion is completely gone. So this is completely destroyed, and the signals are not getting transmitted, or impulse or nutrients or nothing is getting transmitted to the distal portion of the neuron. So there's a regeneration. That is 1 millimeter per day, and it can be recoverable. It is recoverable. But whereas you see the condition, you see the type called neurotemesis. Here there is a neuroma formation. Here there is a neuroma formation. There is a complete cut, but still to some extent, the proximal portion is going to grow as a new new part. It's going to grow little, very little. But remember that the portion that is cut is not going to come and join in this type, that is in the neurotemesis. So Wallerian degeneration, you can just take it as a maybe you can use it for notes. When a peripheral nerve is cut, the part of the nerve separated from the cell body shows a series of chemical and physical degenerative changes. So changes in the distal part, and then changes in the proximal part, and changes in the cell body of the neuron. So the Wallerian degeneration is an important short note, and this question you are basically going to explain what are the different causes of the Wallerian degeneration, how a nerve can be cut, if due to any injury or gunshot, or due to any toxins, if the nerve is cut or any disturbance happens to a nerve, it should be classified. So you are going to follow two types of classification. So these types should be explained in detail. So what are the changes happening in the distal part? Now let's discuss in detail. Axis cylinder swells, breaks into fragments, debris collects in the axis cylinder place. Macrophages remove debris of the axis cylinder. Myelin sheath slowly disintegrates into fat droplets. Schwann cells proliferate rapidly. Very, very important. Schwann cells, the first cell that is going to support for a nerve to grow. Neurolemma remains intact. Neurolemmal tube becomes empty. It's called ghost tube because it is empty. Schwann cell cytoplasm fills the neurolemmal tube. Changes in the proximal part. Same degenerative changes as in the distal part called anterograde degeneration. So look at the picture here. This is the normal one. This is the normal one. This is the proximal stump and the distal. The cut. There's a cut between the two portions. This is a sudden cut. You can see the endoneurial tube. This is the neurolemmal sheath, and then the myelin, then the axon, then the axolemma. So here we can see the motor end plate. This is the normal picture. Once the nerve is cut, so here we can see the Schwann cells, phagocytic Schwann cells, and then the myelin debris. So here we can see the neuron that is getting completely disturbed, but slowly as it grows, the regeneration. The changes in the cell body starts after 48 hours of nerve injury. The first nasal granules disintegrates into fragments called chromatolysis, a very, very important concept. First nasal granules disintegrates into fragments. Golgi apparatus disintegrates, cell body swells due to accumulation of fluid, neurofibrils disappear, nucleus is pushed into the periphery. See here the Wallerian degeneration. These are the peripheral nerves just supplying the skeletal muscle. You can see the skeletal muscle here. And then once it is cut, there is the nerves are not going to supply the skeletal muscles anymore. And here slowly the regeneration is happening. We can see the growth of the Schwann cells, and it is connecting the proximal, the distal portion of the neurons. And slowly once it happens, once the proximal and distal portion gets connected, once it grows, and the same way how it innervates the skeletal muscles are going to happen. The neurons are going to innervate the skeletal muscles. Now let's see what is nerve regeneration. How the degenerated nerve is going to get regenerated. Criteria for a nerve to regenerate: gap should be between the cut ends. The gap should be less than 3 mm. The neurolemma should be intact. The nucleus should be intact. There should not be any block. The two cut ends remains in the same line. Very important. Axons in the CNS can never regenerate. We'll see why it is not, why it cannot. Nerve regeneration. Schwann cells grow in all directions, forming pseudopodia-like fibers. This is how a nerve is going to regenerate. Entry of fibers into endoneurial tube. Schwann cells proliferate and form a continuous tube. Axis cylinder gets fully established. The fibers grow towards the degenerated muscle fibers due to some chemical attraction called neurotrophism. And then Schwann cells produce myelin sheath. The same changes, like whatever disappeared and whatever lost during the degeneration is going to come back. The same points you can just add, and this is a process called regeneration. Again, the same picture explains site of injury, how the distal portion is getting degenerated, and the distance between cut ends, the two cut ends, if it is less than 3 mm, and it's going to grow like a previous one. And then this is the Schwann cell that is degenerated, and now the entire neuron is proliferated, is regenerated, and former connection is established between the neuron and the skeletal muscle. So in neurotomesis, we can see the formation of the neuroma. A picture actually shows the formation of the neuroma. Factors that affect the regeneration. Type of injury. The gap between the two cut ends are very important. Distance to cell body. Worse with proximal injuries. Damage to adjacent tissue. Presence of foreign bodies. ischemia and infections, various infections, and delay between injury and repair. These are some of the factors which are affecting the and no nerve regeneration in CNS. Very simple. The absence of endoneurial tube and also the failure of oligodendrocytes to serve us in the same manner as Schwann cells in PNS. Now, we were just talking about the something like the neurons. Neurons are going to secrete important substance called neurotransmitters. These are the very important substances which has to be secreted, and it is secreted by the axon terminals, and it is going to act on the postsynaptic membrane. The most important neurotransmitter would be acetylcholine. Mostly the acetylcholine is excitatory. Any neurotransmitter should be either excitatory or inhibitory. So acetylcholine is found to be the excitatory one. And neurons of basal ganglia, motor cortex, preganglionic neurons of ANS, postganglionic neurons of parasympathetic, postganglionic fibers of sympathetic neurons, both they all secrete acetylcholine. So norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is secreted by postganglionic sympathetic neurons, and it is one of a neurotransmitter. It is also one of a neurotransmitter. Likewise, like we have GABA, glycine, and these are epinephrine and adrenaline. Like these are some of the neurotransmitters. Now, what is a nerve conduction study? Nerve conduction study basically it tests the it is going to basically evaluate the function of any nerve. It could be a sensory nerve or it could be a motor nerve. It just evaluates the functional ability of the nerve. As usual, like how we measure, how we do the ECG and EEG. Normally, the electrodes are placed over the particular area. Likewise, here also we place the particular electrodes for the nerves, over the nerves. Whichever nerve we want to study, we just have to place the particular electrode. And once the electrodes are placed in the particular area, the test can be done. And it is usually used to assess the functional ability, that is whether the nerve's conduction velocity is normal or not. So whether it is working or not. So it can be measured using the nerve conduction study. I think